So we're going to start with a quick intro, and we're just going to look at SUMIFS because these three formulas work the same way. So SUMIFS, this is Google's definition right here: sum range, criterion, and etc. So the sum range is the column that you want to add up, and then criteria range is talking about the column you're going to look at to determine when you want to add it or not. For example, if you're looking at a column and there's apples and oranges and pears, and you want to only add up apples, then you're going to look at the column that has the fruit in here, and then you're going to compare your criterion to apples. All right, so SUMIFS formula only adds up those cells that meet all the conditions you specify. You can specify with SUMIFS, COUNTIFS, AVERAGEIFS as many as you want. Repeating there. One thing to note, you want the same number of rows in your sum range and criteria range. So for example, D5 to D20, not D5 to D20 and then C1 to C5. It can be offset, but it just needs to be the same number of rows. And a couple notes here. If you're using text, wildcard characters, or dates, you want to enclose them in quotation marks like this. Numbers will not be when used on their own. So you can see numbers and cell references. If you're using logical operators with numbers, so greater than, equals, less than or equals, greater than or equals, or text, you must use that in double quotes like this. And then finally, if you're using a cell reference or another reference to maybe another formula, something like that, you need an ampersand, which is this symbol right here. So if you want to do, for example, greater than what's in B1, or if you want to do greater than or equals to today. All right, with that little preamble, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our first one. So we're going to look at SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, and COUNTIFS from this data set. And what we're going to do here, we'll just start right off. So SUMIFS, open our parentheses. And now our sum range is the first criteria you want to look at. So you can just click and drag, or you can enter it manually. So I can type it in, E5 through, and then I have to see the bottom one, E22. Or I can just use my mouse, and I can just click and drag. And then use a comma to separate. And then my next was, let's open up this formula help. So we have our sum range. Next is our criteria range. So our criteria range was the column with fruits that we want to compare. So we can grab that again, hit comma, and now I can just click on this cell just like that. And we're going to go ahead and see that result. So I can drag this down to view oranges and peaches. One thing to note though, if you're going to drag around formulas, you can check out my other tutorial on cell reference locking. You do want to lock these or they will update and move. So let me just go ahead and reset these. I'm just hitting F4 to cycle through the cell reference locking. If I drag this down, you'll see that this E5 and E22 went to E6 and E23. So that's not what we want, because then we can start cutting off some of our fruit there. So I'm going to go ahead and hit F4 to just lock these. I'm not going to lock the I5 because I'm just going to go ahead and drag this down. And so I can see my apples, my oranges, and my peaches. All right. So the great thing about these formulas, SUMIFS, AVERAGEIFS, and COUNTIFS, is I can quickly adapt. So AVERAGEIFS is use the exact same format. So you can just basically change it from SUMIFS to AVERAGEIFS. And then we can do the same thing for COUNTIFS. COUNTIFS, however, does not use a sum range because you're just counting how many. So what we're going to do is get rid of the sum range at the beginning. And we're just going to look at fruit and our operator right there. So if we look at this, we got our criteria range, which is fruit. And then our criterion is this cell that contains the word apples. So I can go ahead and close that one out, drag that down, and now we can see. So that's using a cell. Let me go ahead and just show you how you can do this just using the word in. Let me clear these out. So I can use just the word typed right in here in double quotes, as we mentioned before, just like that. I could even update this to oranges. And you can see that's how you do the text, just like that. And so these others would update the same. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our next one. So this is going to be for dates. So maybe we want to see how many we sold between a certain date or after a certain date. So we have a small data range here, but we don't have enough to work with. So let's do SUMIFS. We're going to start with our quantity column that we're going to sum up. Then we're going to grab our date column. And now remember, when we're comparing, we need to use the double quotes. And so we're going to go ahead and just start with a start date. So I'm going to do greater than, and then we can do greater than, equals to, or greater, or just greater than, depending upon whether we want to include the start date or just be greater than the start date. So I'm going to go ahead and do greater than, equals to, just so we include the start date in our results. So I'm just going to go ahead and click here. So we have 0 because we don't have a start date selected. So we can go ahead and start with March 1st. And here we're going to see a total quantity of 504. Go over here and select our little helpful thing. We can see that Google's telling us there's 504 quantity. All right, so maybe we go for today, and we see that drop down now to 411. So now we're only going from here. Again, I can double check, see that we have 411. All right, so let me go ahead and add another criteria. We're going to add an end date. So remember, we can add multiple criteria. So I'm going to copy this, so I don't have to retype this, hit a comma to separate, and then add another criteria, just like this. So now I want to do less than or equals to, and I want to reference the end date cell. So I just keep the same. We have the sum range, we have the date range here, greater than or equals to our start date, our date range again, and then less than or equals to our end date. So if I go ahead and select an end date here, let's say March 6th, you can see 411. Go back one, you can see 504, which is, that's our original. We're including everything now. Now I can rewind backwards. I can go to 35, 34, 33, and so forth. So we can see 32 and 33, just like that. All right, this works the same way for average ifs. So we can see our average order for that date period was 25. We rewind one, go to 6. You can see it climbs up a little bit. All right, and then finally, we can go ahead and see COUNTIFS. And remember, we don't need the sum range. So just iron it out like that. All right, so if I pull this down a little bit, let's see, we have 15 orders. 12 orders, 9 orders. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our next one, which is multiple criteria. So we kind of already got into that with dates, but we're going to look at using dates here as well as fruits. So as you can imagine, it's very similar to this. So let me go ahead and start this in right here. SUMIFS. Going to grab our quantity column right off the bat. And then usually I do, if we have one here and then maybe dates, I might do this next. Just give myself a little space. And then grab my date column. Now I want to do my double quotation marks. I'm going to go ahead and do my greater than or equals to, and then ampersand to concatenate that cell. And then I'm going to go ahead and grab this date column again. And now I'm going to do less than or equals to and my end date reference right there. All right. So if I add a date range here, now I can see I have 192 apples. And I can drag this down. I'm going to have to lock some of these so they don't move, because if I move this now, it's going to show up 0 because all these references moved. So let me go ahead and delete this, go back to here. So I want to lock this because I don't want this one to move, nor this one. I9 is the fruit, so I want that one to move down, so I can leave that there. Lock this one. I don't want the start date. It doesn't go down anymore. And so I'm locking everything basically except for the fruit. And so now if I drag this down, I can see my apples, oranges, and peaches for the state range. So if I go down to 4, you can see all these updated. So again, same thing. If I drag this over here, change this to AVERAGEIFS, and I can see my average quantity. Drag this down, I can grab the same thing again, copy it, grab it over here, and change this to COUNTIFS, and again, removing my sum range. Drag this down, and we have our table filled. All right, let's go ahead and jump into our next one. So now we're going to look at comparing to numbers. So I have some examples here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to just change this. Well, let's start with just doing comparison in the numbers. So I'm going to do SUMIFS. And I'm going to check this quantity. And now, so SUMIFS, check this quantity, where this quantity is greater than 35. So this is the total number of orders that have a greater quantity than 35. So if I change this to 0, let's see that goes to 504. So this kind of gives you an idea if you want to see how many large orders you have in your data set. We do 35, so we have 232. Go 45, we have 0. Go 40, we have $83, which I believe we have 1, 2. Yep, that's 83 right there. All right, so we can compare it directly to the cell. I can't use this greater than symbol there, but I can do 35. And then so this one, instead of 40 in the cell, I can do that ampersand to grab a cell and go just like that. Now I can change this and see that number dynamically change. All right, so again, this transitions right over here to AVERAGEIFS and COUNTIFS. Yeah, with COUNTIFS, we don't need the sum range. And so there we have it just like that. All right. So the same thing works. I can just change this to less than. And then if I go to 40, you can see that changes. I didn't change these to less than yet. Just make these consistent. All right. So 42, 43, and I can see I'm including all my orders. I believe 43 is bigger than any of the others. All right, we can add less than or equals to, just like that. And so now 42 is our largest. Now if I go to 42, it's going to remain the same, whereas before it dropped down because it was looking at less than. So we looked at greater than, less than or equals to, less than. And now the only thing left here, I believe, is to do two numbers. So what we can do here is we'll just use two of these cells. We'll do greater than, less than, and greater than. So we can do less than, and then we can do copy this and build our greater than. And change that to I7. So if we go to 0 and 43, we'll see we have our full data set of 504 quantity. Double check this real quick. We see our sum over here, 504. So if I go to 10, we exclude a couple orders there. If I go to 15, a couple more, maybe drop this down to 35. Now we can see we're solidly in the middle. So we can go ahead and copy this, change the averages as well. And again, copy this over for COUNTIFS. Again, removing the sum range. And changing this to COUNTIFS. So now we have all of our set here are updating based on our entry here. Obviously we can include this, we can change this to greater than equals to, less than or equals to. Just like that. And now if we go to 42, 0, we see our full data set. All right, that's it for that one. let's go ahead and jump into another one. So this one's a little more tricky. So what you see, we have a month lookup table over here. We have a month drop down, and we have a year selector. And so what we're doing here is we're going to build a formula to reference the number of apples sold, number of oranges sold, number of peaches sold for a particular month. So I have this formula already typed out here. It's a little long, but I'm going to go walk you through it real quick. So if you've been watching, you're going to already see this is our sum range, this is our quantity. Next, we're looking at our fruit, comparing it to I9, which is our fruit. Next, we have C5 through C22, which is our date. And now we're doing, you should remember this, greater than or equals to. And we're doing our ampersand to compare to. And so now we have this date formula. And so what we're doing here is we're building a date. So you can see it's popping up here. It's telling me it's January 1st, 2022. So let me walk you real quick through how this is getting calculated. So if we open this helper for the date formula, you can see date begins with year, then month, then day, separated by commas. So if you look here, we have J4 is the year coming from this cell. Next, we have this complicated VLOOKUP. And at the end, we have 1. So the VLOOKUP is just taking our selected month and looking up in the month lookup table to figure out the month number. Because this is a little more friendly to use than having 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. It's a little more friendly to use a table like this with the month names. So this VLOOKUP is turning this January into a 1 so I can get my date of 1/1/2022. So that's how this date is put together. And then we have another one to determine the end of the month. So we have the exact same date formula right in here, coming up with 1/1/2022. And then we're wrapping it inside of a end of month formula, which takes the start date and then gives you the end of the month based on how many months you put in. So I put in 0 inside this end of the month. If you look, here's the date formula. I have a comma and 0. So I have 0 months, which means it's going to show the end of the month for the same month. So this is giving us, if I take this whole formula, 1/31/2022. So now I'm looking at this date is being compared to greater than or equals to January 1st, and then again to less than or equal to January 31st. So that was a little bit maybe hard to understand. Hopefully, if you need to rewatch this, maybe look up some of these formulas. This date formula is pretty simple. If you don't know VLOOKUP, go ahead and check out our other video on VLOOKUP. All right. So now that I've gone through this whole formula, it may look long, but if you break it down, it's this exact same SUMIFS formula that we've been using. So at this point, you can see I've already locked everything except for this I9, which is our fruits. So if I drag this down, you can see now I have apples, oranges, and peaches. Go ahead and just make this solid here. So now I can see my apples, oranges, and peaches. If I select a different month, you can see they all update. Now I created a different one here just for the dates. So let me get rid of this. In case you're wondering, if you do a single quote in front of an equals in a formula, it allows it to show as text instead of being rendered as the result. So I'm just going to go ahead and take that away. And so now we can see 4, 5, 7, 6 is our total here, and we're getting the same thing here. So this is the same SUMIFS. All we have in here though is the dates and not the fruit. All right, and this is handy for catching anything that may not be showing up here. Like for example, if you might be missing some data. So for example, here we have oranges, but if for some reason you had an order come in without it, then you can see that if we didn't have this total, we might think our total orders was 3518, but this would capture if something wasn't specified in the data. All right, so again, same thing. We can just copy this, paste it over here, change that to AVERAGEIFS. Drag that down. And so our average is the same as SUMIFS because we only have one entry for each month right now. And so if we copy this over, we can go ahead and change this to COUNTIFS. Again, getting rid of our sum range. Let's see, one order. And then let's go ahead and copy this and change it for our totals. So this should change a little bit. So I'm getting rid of our D column, which is where our fruits come from and where we're comparing it to. And then you can see here, that is our average quantity. And again, same thing for COUNTIFS. And I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this D column, just like that. All right, so that was maybe a little more challenging to understand. Hopefully that all makes sense. And I will be providing this file in the comments for you to be able to review and look over, so you can check this out at your convenience. All right, let's go ahead and dive into some more. We got a couple more to go, so I hope you're still watching and I haven't lost you yet. Let's look at a couple more cool functions here. So wildcard is a way to do maybe what you might call a fuzzy match or a not exact match. So what we have here, and you can see I already have the formula typed out. So it's pretty simple. What we have here, you can see we have the same SUMIFs. So we have our sum range, our criteria range, our criteria apple, but I've wrapped it with these asterisks. And so what these asterisks tell Google is that I want to find any cells that have apple in it. And so it's come up with 168. Now, one thing you'll see is I can change this to APP. Still does the same. If I do GRE, now we're picking up the green apple. And so it's not very discriminatory if you're searching for something like that. Another thing to note is I have these two asterisks here at the beginning and end. One thing you can do, maybe you want to start searching at the beginning, and so you could do apple and end with the asterisk. Just like that. Now, what will happen if you start trying to search for something that's not the beginning, then it's going to return 0. Even though green's in here, if I return this asterisk to the beginning, it shows back up again. So this is talking about the ending and the beginning of the string. So if I'm looking only for green at the end of the string, I can do that, and it won't find green if it's the beginning. And so that's how it works, just like that. So this may look a little more confusing, but this is how you reference a cell. So this is looking at orange. So maybe we have a misspelling. It was orng, or oring. And so we can still find the results here. And so basically we have the same thing. We have that asterisk at the beginning, and then we have to do this ampersand to add a cell, and an ampersand again to add the rest of the wildcard. All right, and so if we just want to search the beginning, we can go ahead and get rid of this at the beginning and just start with H6 and leave the asterisk at the end. And you can see now it's searching for orang on orange. And so we can change this to oranges, have the same thing. Now, one thing you'll notice, if I change this to oranges, we're going to drop down because this is just orange, not oranges. So you can see down here we have oranges, 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 but this one's just orange. So as soon as we add that S here, it's dropping off those blood oranges. All right, so again, the same thing works. I'm not going to go through it right now in the interest of time. But the same thing works, AVERAGEIFS, COUNTIFS. All right, let's go ahead and jump into another one that people like to see. This is using SUMIF inside of Arrayformula. So first question people might have is, why are we now using a SUMIF versus a SUMIFS? And maybe some of you didn't notice that yet. So I have a little description here. So SUMIFS, the sum column is at the beginning, and then your criteria column and criterion followed by as many more as you need. Whereas SUMIF has one criteria column, one criterion, and then your sum column. So it's reversed, the sum column's at the end. And another thing to note is you cannot add more criterion by adding more commas and criterion at the end. So this is all that you get. Now I will show you in a second how you can kind of get around that. But if you do notice that make sure you notice that the structure is different. But the one advantage is that a SUMIF you can actually use inside of Arrayformula, and I'll show you why and how that works in a second. So, just to answer a quick question I'm sure some of you have is, why don't I use SUMIF if I'm only using one criterion? So in our beginning, when we had apples, why didn't I use SUMIF here instead of SUMIFS? And the answer is, I usually use SUMIFS unless I'm doing it in Arrayformula. And the reason why is because then it makes it very consistent. I can always start with a quantity column or the dollar amount column, whatever it is. I can start with that first and just build from there. And then I'm not starting with the SUMIF because I only have one criterion, and then later I realize, oh, I need to add another one, and then I have to rearrange the formula when I do that. So that's the reason why I normally just use SUMIFS when I'm building, except for inside of an Arrayformula. So I have a formula pre-built here, and you'll notice that even though I didn't drag it down, it automatically filled. And so that's what this SUMIF inside the Arrayformula does is, and if we look at this structure, now remember we're backwards, so this is the sum range, and this is our criterion. Now, our criterion is the fruit here, but you'll notice instead of looking at one cell, we're actually looking at 3. And so inside this Arrayformula, this is going to automatically expand down to fill and actually compare to each one of those. Now, if you want to see these results just in one cell, we can wrap this in a sum, and now it's going to show up in one cell. But oftentimes, what you'll want to see is it to show, hey, how many apples, how many oranges, how many peaches did I sell? And this allows you to do it inside one cell. And so the same thing works for COUNTIFS, or COUNTIF, I should say. Now, one thing to note is this method does not work with AVERAGEIFS for some reason. I'm not sure exactly why, but it does not. So if you're looking for AVERAGEIFS, you're probably going to have to use the SUMIF and COUNTIF and then manually do your average here. Just like that. All right. So that's it on the basics here. And let's go ahead and jump over here. We have multiple criteria. So like I said before, you can't use multiple criteria with SUMIF, right? Except for you kind of can. You have to use this little bit of a hack. So let me show you what's going on here. So just like we saw before, now remember again, SUMIF, this is our sum range here, this is our quantity. And so this is our criteria 1, this is our criteria 2. So if you look here, it's showing us our first one. Or I guess apparently not. It's showing one random one down here. It's showing Mexico peaches. So what it's doing, this and is combining those two columns together. And so this is what it's looking like. So it's US apples, CA oranges, MX peaches, all the way down. And then this is what it looks like. And then we're going to compare it to our criterion. I'm combining this US with our apples, oranges, peaches, just like we did in the last one. And so what this is coming up with, US apples, and then the next one would be US oranges, and the next one would be US peaches. So that's kind of a hack way to get around it. So we can use multiple criteria inside of SUMIF for an Arrayformula, which you normally cannot do. And so now we can look at this and we can do select Canada, and we can see sold 0 apples Canada. Go to Mexico, we can see our results there. Same thing works for COUNTIFS, but again, remember it does not work for AVERAGEIFS, so again, it does not work here. All right, so I'm glad you guys stayed with me so far. We have one more to go, and maybe later I'll add some more videos and some other ways that you can use SUMIFs, COUNTIFS, and AVERAGEIFS in some unusual ways. But for now, I think this last one will wrap it up, and we'll give you some helpful ways to use this. All right. So one thing people ask is, how do you do OR inside of a SUMIF? What if I want to say, I want to see apples or oranges? Now, there's 2 ways to do this. One way, and I'll just show you right here, is I can literally just create 2 SUMIFs and then add them together. And so if I go like this, grab this apples, compare it to this apples here. All right. So now I'm seeing for my apples, and I can do the same thing, change this to 6 to show oranges. Now what I can do, and this is what some people do, I've done this plenty of times, just do a plus in SUMIFs. And so this is how I could do, in essence, an OR. I want to show how many apples or oranges we have. Now, what I have here is an alternative way to do this that may make it a little faster if you have perhaps more than 2. So maybe you want to do apples, oranges, or pears. Apples, oranges, peaches, or pears, or grapefruit. And so if you do those plus, you can wind up with a very long formula very quickly, and you can actually achieve it with a much shorter formula, just like this. So this probably looks very similar to what we just did, except you'll notice it looks a little different here. So I don't have time to explain exactly how all this works, but we have this SUMIF. So again, our sum range is here, and this is our criteria range. So it's using this array literal to separate the results instead of doing that plus. So what it's doing then is this SUMIF, we can break this out actually. And you can see here it's doing the same thing. This is that SUMIF for apples. This is the SUMIF for oranges. And then it's just wrapping it in a sum to add them up. And then again, we can do the same thing for AVERAGEIFS, and this one for some reason it works. And then we have sum. All right, so that is it for today. Actually, before we go, let me just show you. You can do the same thing manually here. Apples, oranges, just like that. I just want to show you that real quick, in case you're wondering how to do other values. You can do the same thing here if you wanted to look at order amounts and stuff like that. All right, that's it for today, folks. I hope that was helpful for you and helps up your Google Sheets game. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you subscribe and come back soon.